Hello everyone, Sigs here, and in this video we're going to take a look at the Viscous Fallout Encounter in the Gnomeregan Raid in Phase 2 of the World of Warcraft Classic Season of Discovery from a Healing Mage point of view. Now, I do already have a non-narrated version of this encounter up. If you prefer to watch that, you can find a link here in the top right or down in the description. However, some people have said that they would like to hear a little bit about the thought process behind how a Healing Mage operates, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at this boss. And I'll go over a bit about the Healing Mage rotation, as well as maybe slowing down the footage at some parts to go over some key mechanics and moments in this fight that you should know to increase your performance as a Healing Mage. At the time of upload, this was a 98 parse, which has since been downgraded to a 97 once the logs batch posted. That's not to flex, that is just to say that this is a pretty good example of how much healing a Healing Mage can really do, which is quite a lot in the right situations. So I will put the talents and runes that I am running on screen now. There will also be a link to logs down in the description if you would like to see a more detailed healing breakdown. And with that, we'll get into the footage and go over some of the stuff that I did wrong so that you can correct those mistakes yourself, as well as see some of the moments where I did things optimally so that you can follow that template to do as much healing as possible. So I do always like to start off by applying regeneration to both tanks before the pull and then sitting down to drink, so that way we can start the fight with 100% mana as well as get some free healing on the tanks, not have to apply beacon right at the start. Start off with an Arcane Blast, get the tanks topped up, and then we go into mass regeneration because the first big mechanic is coming out here. So this is the main mechanic of the fight. The boss will spawn these 3 adds and they will run towards these shackles on the ground, and if they reach one, they will transform into a different add that is much harder to deal with. So ideally you want to slow these and then defeat them before they reach these shackles. You can see we have a Frost Trap down here, which is slowing them nicely, and you just want all your DPS to switch and try to kill those oozes. You as the Healing Mage can also switch to these to deal damage to ensure that they are defeated in time. However, you don't want to lose uptime on your tank healing, so if you're going to switch to target one of them, you want to make sure that whatever you're casting on it is able to be completed so that you deal the damage and therefore the healing to your beacon targets. If you start casting an Arcane Blast and then the target is defeated before your cast finishes, then all that time you spent casting without completing the cast and dealing the damage is wasted time, which means you're not healing, and you can fall a little bit behind on tank healing as well as overall HPS. So personally, I just sit on the boss and make sure that all my casts are completing and that I'm doing my job as a healer. However, depending on your group, you may need to switch if you need a little bit more DPS to defeat them in time. You may also need to use Cone of Cold or Frost Nova or something to slow these adds so that they don't reach the shackles. Just depends on your group and how they are. Hopefully your DPS can handle them on their own, leaving you to just keep targeting the boss and doing healing, which should be your primary goal as a healer. We did have one of these goos reach these shackles, and as you'll see here, it is transformed into a Desiccated Fallout, and that is where the vast majority of the damage on this fight will come from, is if one of these transforms and casts his radiation burn. So that is why we pre-ramped our first mass regeneration before the adds came out, and then we cast our second one when it was available along with arcane powers, so that we enter this phase with 10 beacons up and a buff to our damage so that we can heal through this radiation burn that goes out. You can see there's 1 stack on everybody in the raid now, and I do throw out a counter spell there on the radiation burn. That is the ability that is applying this stack to everybody, and that does kind of suck as a healer. You know, it's a waste of mana, it's a GCD that you're not DPSing or healing, which is not great when there's other classes that can interrupt essentially for free, like a rogue or other melee DPS. However, I thought it was more important to not let these stacks build up and get out of hand. Honestly, if I wanted to get a better parse, I could have let that go off and probably healed through 2 stacks just fine and done more HPS, but one of the best ways to heal damage is to prevent it from happening in the first place, so we do throw the counter spell there, and now we only have 1 stack to worry about. So in order to heal through that, we're going to want to keep 10 beacons up by casting mass regeneration on alternating groups every time that it's off cooldown, and then casting Arcane Blast and spending Missile Barrage procs to heal our beacon targets, which we do here. And then we do get low on mana here, but that's okay. You really want to burn through your mana during that first add phase as much as possible, just to make sure that everybody is kept healthy. Sometimes you don't know how much AoE damage is going to go out, how many casts the add is going to get off, so I prefer to just arcane power there, dump all my mana, make sure there is plenty of healing going out by keeping 10 beacons on every target and doing as much damage as possible, and then as soon as the adds are defeated, hopefully you are in a good spot to evocate. And I do kind of mess up my Evocate here, so Evocate increases your mana regeneration by a percentage based off of how much mana regeneration you have, scaled off of your spirit and other stats. So if you have more spirit, you could potentially restore 100% of your mana in less ticks, and if you have less, it may take more ticks, which means you have to channel for longer to get the same amount of mana back. There is a certain breakpoint where you will restore all of your mana in only 3 ticks, which is 6 seconds, instead of in 4 ticks, which is 8 seconds. And if you can reach that breakpoint, that's really nice. It means you don't have to channel Evocate for quite as long, which means you can get an extra cast in and get a little bit more healing out. However, I would not encourage sacrificing spell power or intellect or spirit in this regard. However, if you do have a weapon with a lot of spirit, you can make a macro to switch to this in combat right before you cast Evocate and then restore your mana a little bit quicker and then switch back to your primary spell power and intellect weapon as soon as Evocate ends. Where I mess up is right at the end here, so I should have just canceled Evocate immediately on the 3rd tick and been fine at 87% mana. Or I should have let it just go all the way and gotten the extra 13% mana by getting to 100%. Instead, I canceled the channel kind of right in between those 2 ticks because I was deciding if it was worth waiting or not. I should have either bit the bullet and just canceled it immediately on the 3rd tick, or I should have waited for the extra 13% mana on the 4th tick, but canceling in between ticks means you were just standing there doing nothing for about a second, which is a second that you could have spent casting something else, therefore reducing your overall DPS and HPS by not casting something at all times. In this particular situation, given that the boss was already at about half health, I probably should have just canceled it immediately. That extra 13% mana isn't going to really make much of a difference, and if it would, I do also have a mana jade and a healing potion available, and it's highly unlikely that with those tools also available, I would have run out of mana at the pace that we were going. So finding a good time to evocate where there's not a lot of healing going out for 6 to 8 seconds is quite important, and making sure that you can regenerate your mana in as few ticks as possible, potentially by using a spirit weapon, is also quite useful. But continuing on with the fight here, the boss is now dropping sludge puddles, which do deal damage to anybody who stands in them. There's also AoE damage going out, so we want to keep using mass regeneration off cooldown. Once again, spending our missile barrage procs whenever they're available, and otherwise just hard casting Arcane Blast. And now I'm doing something a little bit cheeky here, which is padding the meters by standing in the sludge puddles. In this particular instance, I'm going to be casting mass regeneration on my group anyway, just to meet the required healing for this part of the fight with the AoE damage that's going out. So I will already have a beacon on myself. I also don't take any spell pushback from standing in the sludge, which means I can continue to cast as I normally would. What this does is essentially leads to free healing on myself. Since I'm not committing any extra resources beyond doing what I would be doing anyway, I am getting healing on myself that I wouldn't otherwise be getting if I was at full health. So by standing in the sludge, I am padding my HPS to get a higher HPS number and therefore a higher parse at essentially no additional cost. Now, I would never recommend doing this, as if something goes wrong and you die and then your raid wipes because you're not healing them and you waste everybody's time, that's really not worth it, so it is not a good thing to do. However, if you can get away with it and you know that it's going to work out, you are going to get more HPS by doing things like this. As a healer, you can only heal as much damage as is going out, so by creating more opportunities for damage to go out, you can do more healing. In my opinion, your primary goal as a healer is, of course, to keep everybody alive and then have a secondary objective of doing as much additional damage as possible to speed up the encounter so that you can get through it as quickly and optimally as possible, get your loot, move on to the next boss, and not waste anyone's time. However, due to the nature of parsing as a healer, you can only heal as much as there is damage going out, so finding opportunities like this to increase your individual performance are always available to you. But getting back into the fight, there is another wave of ads about to come out, so just like before, we want to be using mass regeneration off cooldown, making sure we have 10 beacons out, and then hard casting Arcane Blast until we get missile barrage procs to spend, remembering to stop what we are doing and cast mass regeneration on alternating groups whenever possible. Right at the end of the fight, everybody is tunneling, basically ignoring mechanics and burning the boss, and so am I, which is not great, but you'll see we shoot up from about 380 to 420 HPS right at the end of the fight here. There's a lot of AoE damage going out. You can see all those stacks building up on everybody, so just getting off this last mass regeneration right at the last second is going to spike our overall HPS up quite a bit. Now, depending on how your group does, this may go differently, but just remember for that ad phase, that is the most healing intensive part of the fight. You may have 0 stacks go out, you may have 5+ stacks go out. You can potentially heal through many stacks, especially with arcane power and enough mana available. Just remember that you want 10 beacons out going into that ad phase, so you're going to want to cast mass regeneration basically every time as soon as it comes off cooldown on alternating groups so that you can maintain 10 beacons at all times throughout the AoE portion of the fight. Beyond that, just spam Arcane Blast and drop the missile barrage procs whenever they are available. If you really needed incredibly high spike healing, you could go up to 4 stacks of Arcane Blast before spending your missile barrage proc for even more damage and therefore even more healing. However, this is much more mana intensive, and you could also be getting additional procs that you aren't spending as you build your way to 4 stacks. So there's always a trade-off. If you have the mana available, if the boss is going down really fast, if you're using things like your mana jade and a mana potion and you know that you're going to have the extra mana available, you can certainly do way more spike healing by doing more arcane blasts before resetting your stacks with an arcane missiles or another arcane spell. However, the way the spec is set up now with the missile barrage procs costing 0 mana and resetting your arcane blast stacks, it does work out quite well to just spend them whenever you get them. On AoE healing fights like this, where you're going to be using mass regeneration every time it's off cooldown, you're most likely going to end up getting 2 arcane blasts to every mass regeneration anyway, so your arcane blast charges will increase the healing done by mass regeneration as well as resetting your stacks. However, the healing done from chronomantic healing, which is the healing done from dealing arcane damage, is much higher than any direct healing you do with regeneration or mass regeneration, so it's much better if you can clear your stacks with an arcane missiles and thereby arcane damage than it is to have them be cleared by your mass regeneration or regeneration. So at that point, you just want to dump your missile barrage proc every time you get it anyway, because in the time it would take you to do 4 arcane blasts, your mass regeneration beacons will have fallen off of one group or the other. And then that empowered missile barrage that you do at 4 stacks isn't even going to heal as many targets, leading to less healing overall. So I do find it best to just spend missile barrage procs whenever you happen to get them, and it all kind of works out in the end as being an efficient balance of HPS and DPS throughput to mana efficiency. So that's going to be the end of this video. Sorry if it got a little bit rambly. I don't know how much of this actually needed to be said. It was both a look at this boss specifically, as well as some notes about Healing Mage in Phase 2 in general. So hopefully you found at least some of it useful, and I wish you good luck and high HPS out there in all of your journeys. Definitely feel free to let me know if you have any questions. I'm not an expert. I'm not the best at this game or at this spec, but I do have a lot of experience with this game and do seem to perform fairly well most of the time, and I would be happy to share any of my knowledge with you. So thanks for watching, and have a good one. Take care. Peace.